कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Hello and welcome to Kitabnama, where I am talking today to the energetic Justice Leela Seth, the first woman Chief Justice of any High Court in India. Justice Seth has just published her latest book, Talking of Justice. This is her third book, and welcome to the show, Justice Seth.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about your newest book before we go back to talking about your previous books. This is Talking of Justice. This is a collection of essays and talks that you gave after 1992, which is when you retired. Is that right?
That's correct. In fact, the first essay and the last essay are something that was written quite recently. The first is based on my experience in the Justice Verma Committee, which most of you know was a result of the Nirbhaya case, the Nirbhaya rape case. And so that was not an earlier essay, and the last is based on section 377 after the judgment of the Supreme Court overruled the decision of the Delhi High Court decriminalizing homosexuality.
The book does begin with your experiences at the Justice J.S. Verma Commission, and you were one of the members, one of the three members. When you look back at that time, December 2012, did any of us really, did you anticipate the level of protest, the level of anger that happened following the Nirbhaya case?
No, not really. In fact, what I was amazed about, that it was all the young people who came out on the streets to protest peacefully, and they were not only women, they were men as well, and they came without a leader. They came without a political call. It was something that must have touched their chord, you know. They must have felt somehow in relation to this young woman who had been raped in this horrendous manner. And I think also the social media was the way they contacted each other. And sometimes the person on the right didn't know the person on the left, but they had come out for an issue. This was very important, because people were coming out to try and protest against an issue and not for a political reason. And this was very, very significant. And it went on from day to day. The cold December mornings, they faced the cold water, and they came back and back till I think the government had no choice but to do something about it.
Were you surprised to be invited on this commission?
Well, I was quite surprised, because, you know, just the morning before I was invited on the committee, some friends had come over and we were discussing, and I said, oh, they'll appoint some committee, they'll give a decision in 6 months, and the thing will just fizzle out, as always happens. Nobody takes any notice of these reports. And then just half an hour after I said all this, Mr. Chidambaram, who was then the finance minister, phoned me and said that he wanted me to be on this committee. And I asked him, who is the other person on the committee? And he said, Justice Verma. And I think that made me decide I would like to be on it, because Justice Verma was a very independent judge, and he was also very particular about women's rights.
Justice Verma Commission submitted its report in 29 days.
Yes,
that is a full 24 hours before your deadline ran out. And it was a mammoth task. What did it involve?
It was really a mammoth task, but we could not have done it, the three of us, that was Justice Verma, Gopal Subramaniam and myself. We could not have done it without the help of the young people. Gopal Subramaniam's juniors all came in to help, and they got in many other young lawyers and even students, law students, and I think there were 16 of them, and they had to cope with something like 80,000 suggestions which came in by email, which came in by letter, which came in by fax, which came on telephone, and they collated all these for us, and then we went further.
So you actually did go through every suggestion that came in. Those 80,000 suggestions
they were
that
collated
came
by the young people, and they did a mammoth task. They worked day and night over it.
When you submitted your report was in fact rather wide sweeping. You were asked to make amendments to the criminal law, but you went far, far beyond that. You spoke about police reform, you spoke about changes in education, and in fact what you came up with is what is often regarded as a 21st century manifesto for women.
That's right.
And the government did not accept many of these recommendations. Do you think that was a waste of your time, or do you think the government made a mistake in not accepting it?
I don't think it's a waste of time, because I think that the report is there, and in slow time they will refer to it and make many of those changes. A few of the changes that we suggested, which were pertaining to criminal law, some of them they did incorporate in the new law, and some they did not incorporate, like marital rape, which we were very keen on being incorporated but was not incorporated, and that is as it would be expected of the government. But the one thing they did do, they did it quite fast, those changes. The other changes which we had asked for, like police reforms or army, the Army Act, Representation of People's Act, we wanted that every member of parliament should be free from having committed any sexual offence, and many changes we wanted, and as you mentioned, education, police reforms, gender sensitization, security and safety, things like better lighting. We made very wide suggestions, and I think that they will come in time. At least I'm an optimist. I always hope they'll come in time. So I'm sure they'll come, and I'm sure that this report will be looked on later on. And there's a charter for women, which is very important according to us, and I think that will also come in time.
Nearly 2 years later, if you look at the gender situation in the country, crimes against women are up, the number of reported rapes are up, and even the level of stupid comments, for want of a better word, stupid comments being made by politicians and vice chancellors and police chiefs are up.
That's true, but I think it's also, they were always there, but they were under the carpet. And I think one of the things that the report has done, one of the things that this particular Nirbhaya case brought out, is that people are talking. People are talking about rape, people are talking about sexual offences, people are even saying sometimes nasty things, as you mentioned. But the thing is now in the open, so people are not afraid to discuss it. And I think that's the first stage, because unless you discuss something, you can't improve it. Earlier, everything was being put under the carpet. It was not a matter to be discussed, either in the homes, or parents, or young people, or relations, or even the newspapers. So I think it's the first step, and I think that perhaps the number of sexual offences has not increased, but they are more now out in the open.
Justice Seth, our constitution guarantees equal status to women. Our system also makes it a crime to commit an offence against, let us say, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes is a punishable, non-bailable offence. Is it time for us as a society to consider making hate speech against women a criminal offence?
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, I suppose one could. How do you implement these things? Who said to whom? I mean, normally, of course, if you make hate speeches, religious hate speeches, it can be treated as an offence. But I suppose, I don't think that the laws really do very much except become a springboard for further action. I think this is something which you need to change the mindsets of people. Saying nasty things about women, it could be an offence, it should be made an offence maybe, but I don't know how you will implement it, so that's the difficulty. And I think that in fact the idea is much better to change people's mindsets, because if they don't say it openly, they'll be saying it in homes or quietly, and that's worse. I think we need to go forward by educating people, by having sex education in schools, so that people's mindsets change, people's attitudes toward children, girls change, female feticide stops, infanticide stops. All these kind of things that are anti-girls or anti-women should stop.
Talking about mindsets, you have a chapter in your book about gender sensitization of the judiciary. So how does one change the mindset of the judiciary? And you've referred to a Sessions Court decision on the Bhavri Devi case. And the fact of the matter is that 2 decades later, Bhavri Devi still has not got justice.
Changing mindsets is always a slow process, but it can only change, according to me, by education. And I think that's the first step for changing it. And in fact, mindsets really start from the moment you're born. The kind of lullabies your parents sing to you, the kind of attitudes parents have, all that, the way you see your mother being treated by your father, the way your brother and you are treated, you know, all these things make a difference. And I find that it's a slow process, but it's a process that has to take place. And education will make that change, because girls will demand that they be treated equally. And I think that's very important. Unfortunately, we are all the product of our own upbringing. And that's why you find that in the lower judiciary, there's still much less gender sensitivity than in the higher judiciary. And that's why we saw the difference in the Bhavri Devi case and other cases, where in the Bhavri Devi case, as you remember, they said that no respectable middle-aged man will rape a woman. I mean, it's a ridiculous statement. Who else are raping women, you know? So they let the men off because of that. And they said that a upper caste man will not rape a lower caste woman. I mean, that's also ridiculous, because normally, quite often, rape is not only a sexual offense, it's a question of a power, it's a question of dominating a woman or dominating a particular person in particular society or particular community. So, you know, you have war rapes, which are also for the same reason. You are dominating your enemy, you know. So, I mean, eventually mindsets have to change, and that, though a slow process, it will happen with education, and I think that's the answer.
जी, जस्टिस सेठ, वैसे आपने कहा कि लोअर जुडिशरी नीड्स जेंडर सेंसिटाइजेशन, लेकिन जेंडर सेंसिटाइजेशन और इंसेंसिटिविटी तो हायर जुडिशरी में भी है. जैसे हमने अभी देखा कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने सेक्शन 377 को जो हाई कोर्ट ने जो डीक्रिमिनलाइज किया, वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने जाके कहा कि नहीं, हम उसको नहीं रिवर्स करेंगे. तो आपको कैसे लगा ये?
नहीं, ये ऐसी बात है कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट में ये सब बातें एक्चुअली 5 जज के सामने आनी चाहिए. 2 दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट के जज ने एक डिसीजन दिया और 2 सुप्रीम कोर्ट जजेस ने दूसरा डिसीजन दिया, ओवरटर्न कर दिया उसको. ये तो ऐसी बात है कि मैं सोचती हूँ कि काफ़ी जज डिपेंडेंट है, सब्जेक्टिव चीज़ है. तो इसलिए इसको देख के ये ख्याल आता है कि अगर 5 जज हों, 2 जज को ओवररूल करने, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मैटर्स हैं, तो इसमें फ़र्क आ सकता है.
Were you as a mother, as a citizen, more than a judge, were you disappointed with the Supreme Court decision on 377?
Yes, I was deeply disappointed. And I mentioned this, and I've written an article that says, as a mother and as a judge, I've written the article saying that the total lack of compassion and the total lack of understanding that it's not just 1 or 2 people, but there are so many people who are involved in the, what you call the LGBT, the lesbian, homosexual, transgender people, bisexual people. And they said, oh, there must be just a few. I mean, there was a total lack of science and sensibility about it. I was extremely, and they just said, shuffled it off to the parliament, let parliament decide. I mean, I think that's the judiciary is the final arbiter of the law, and the judiciary could easily interpret and had interpreted the judgment in the section in one way by the High Court, and I think there was really rather unusually harsh for them to have overturned it.
Absolutely, and it shows us really as citizens how very difficult it is to change mindsets.
That's true, and yet you find that 2 judges of the Supreme Court have recently decided on the transgender case in a totally different manner. That's why I say there should always be 5 judges in the Supreme Court doing any kind of constitutional matters like this.
Let's talk a little bit about how you write. Justice Seth, at 84, I believe you are working on your next book. You have 3 books already and you're already working on your next book.
I don't know whether I'm working, but I'm thinking about it. First time, you know, I wrote my first book On Balance. I wrote it because I was over 70 and I'd had my first grandchild. Now people have their grandchildren much younger. So I thought maybe by the time my granddaughter grows up, I won't be there to tell her the stories that I know, because when I was young, the British were still here. So I had a totally different idea. What freedom meant to me at a 16-year-old was something wonderful. People just take it for granted now. You know, we became independent in 1947. What the Constitution means, people take it for granted. We know how almost 3 years it took to draft this Constitution. So that's why I wrote that book, and it has, in a sense, traced not only the legal aspects, but the family aspects of life as they were then and now. And the second book I wrote was for the children, because I thought that children don't know the Constitution, and if because we are a secular country, we don't teach religion in schools, we should at least teach constitutional morality. So I have tried to explain the preamble to the Constitution to children in the simplest of ways and with lovely drawings done by Bindya Thapar. And I think that it has brought the message to them, because I go to schools and talk to them, and I feel it has brought the message to them. And luckily, the On Balance book has been translated into Hindi, and We the Children of India has been translated into 5 Indian languages: Hindi, Urdu, Marathi, Telugu and Kannada, and also into Braille, which I was suddenly surprised. I got a packet from someone and he said I put it into Braille. So I was very happy about that.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
So what is the new book?
Well, there are 2 ideas. One is to write about a book for children, which will be talking about stories that I repeat normally when I deal with the Constitution, and which children can appreciate. And the other might just be incidents or things in life that I've thought about. So that really, and I feel quite optimistic, because it keeps me young when I meet children, it keeps me young when I meet younger people, and it also keeps me active doing these things.
Justice Seth, you are an absolute inspiration to a whole generation of Indian men as well as women. I look forward to your next book, and I look forward to many, many more books from your pen. Thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Namita.
That was Justice Leela Seth talking about her wonderful new book, talking about her previous books, and talking about books that are still to be written. She's an absolute inspiration for an entire generation of men as well as women, giving a voice to those who don't normally have one, and fighting for the rights of women, for children, for prisoners, and for men and women, ordinary citizens across the country.
I am going to be reading from one of our titles called Monkey Business on Stage, which has been written by Subhadra Sen Gupta and illustrated by Tapas Guha. Khajuria village was suffering from Ram Leela fever. It was nothing new. As Kallu said, they got it every year. The fever usually started a month before Dashera. As the low, dark grey monsoon clouds drifted away and the sky turned a glittering blue, there were festivities in the air, and everyone began talking about Master Ji and the Ram Leela. Everywhere in the village, at Dharampal's chai shop, in the vegetable fields, at the grocery store, in Moti Dadi's courtyard and at the tube well, there was a single question being asked: what is Master Ji planning to do this year? Kallu often said admiringly, Master Ji is the producer, director, scriptwriter and music composer of Ram Leela, and only he knows what we will see this year. Master Ji was the head of the village school and the Khajuria Ram Leela party that put up a fantastic show every year. Of course, they couldn't do the whole Ramayana because that was a very long story, and Khajuria did not have enough actors. So Master Ji has written the dialogues of some of the most important scenes, and he would pick a few of them to enact for a week before Dashera. So Khajuria never knew which scenes they would see. A tent was put up in a corner of the field where Badri the milkman kept his buffaloes. A stage was built with a bunch of wobbly folding tables they got from Jai Bhagwan's tent house. The audience sat on the ground on daris, and nowadays, as the village had electricity, they had both gas lamps and electric bulbs to light up the stage. For the first day, Kallu and his gang were hanging around the school building where rehearsals were held, hoping Masterji would give them something to do. In the gang were Kallu, his sister Munia, brother Shabbo, his best friend Damu, and his sister Saru. Day after day, they sat and watched the rehearsals, and by the end, they knew most of the dialogues by heart. Every year, Masterji would select scenes like the Sita Swayamvar with Ram breaking the giant bow, then Kaikeyi and Manthara scheming to send Ram into exile, and Dashrath weeping and dying. Munia's favourite scene was of Lakshman cutting off Shurpanakha's nose and Ravan kidnapping Sita. Then there was Hanuman setting fire to Lanka, and finally the fantastic battle scenes with Ravan, Kumbhakarna and Meghnad fighting Ram, Lakshman and Hanuman and their monkey army. This year their begging had paid off, and Masterji had let Kallu, Damu and Shabbo play monkeys in the Vanar Sena. They were acting in the final battle scene and had to wear shorts, have monkey face makeup and long tails. It was amazing fun as they jumped about waving tin gadas and swords. It made the girls Munia and Saru very envious. "It's so silly," Saru said grimly as they headed from school one morning. "Why can't girls act in the Ramleela?" "Did you see Sita last night?" Munia asked. "That boy studies in Kallu Bhaiya's class and he's starting to get a moustache." "And his voice kept cracking," Saru giggled. "I really think that Billo Chachi would be just perfect as Sita." "Yes, she would. Now, if her husband Dharam Chacha can play Ram, why can't she be Sita?" She even asked Masterji, but he said that the Khajuria Panchayat would stop the Ramleela if he took real women. "That," Saru shook her head in disgust. "Anyway, tonight's Badri Bhaiya's big scene." Munia gave a little skip of happiness. "I can't wait." For Kallu and his gang, the best actor in the show was Badri, the mad buffalo man who always played Hanuman. He was short and stocky, had a head of unruly hair, a bushy moustache, a big round eyes and a booming voice. So when he was on stage, strutting about and yelling out his lines, even Ram and Lakshman faded into the background. According to Kallu and his gang, the scene where Hanuman exchanges insults with Ravan and then sets Lanka on fire was an absolute super hit scene. Masterji had written such fantastic dialogues for Ravan and Hanuman, the audience was totally hypnotized and listened to every word in breathless silence. That evening, the gang was amongst the earliest to arrive at the tent. Badri's buffaloes were tied nearby, and according to Damu, they had to do high jumps over pats of buffalo dung. "Second row from the front, middle of the row. Perfect," said Shabbu, settling down on the dari with a happy sigh. "Well, tomorrow we won't need the seats," said Kallu, giving Munia and Saru a sneaky grin. "We boys will be on stage." "Ha!" Munia shook her curly head. "All you have to do is to jump around like idiots, and none of you have a single line to say." "And Shabbo will be killed by Meghnad and just lie there flat on his back like a log of wood," added Saru with a giggle. "Do you know that it takes real acting to play dead?" Shabbu asked hotly. "You have to breathe very, very slowly and you have to keep your eyes very tightly shut." "You'll get the award for the best dead monkey in Khajuria," Damu grinned. As the sun set, the tent began to fill up. Backstage was a hive of activity, with everyone putting on their costumes and slapping on makeup. Dharampal was free tonight as Ram did not appear in the scene, so he was busy doing the Hanuman makeup on Badri's face. "I wish you would shave off your moustache, Badri," he said. "It looks really odd. Hanuman on TV and films is always clean shaven." "Oh, color it brown and nobody will know," growled Badri. "I am not shaving it, forget it." And then he held the sheets of dialogue before his face, squinted and grumbled. "Why does Masterji keep changing the dialogues every year? He's an artist and all artists are crazy anyway. This year in the Bharat Milap scene, he wanted Ram and Bharat to sing a song," said Dharampal. "A song?" repeated Badri. "Yes, it went something like Bhai Bhai Ka Pyar Amar Rahe something something," Dharampal laughed. "But you can't sing," said Badri. "Exactly, and neither can Lattu, who's playing Bharat. He tried for 2 whole days to make us sing and then gave up." "Thank God," said Dharampal. Suddenly, Badri sat up and yelled at the top of his voice, making Dharampal jump. "Masterji! Masterji! Kya hua?" Masterji came running in a panic. "You wrote a song for Ram, but not for Hanuman, and I can sing," said Badri. "Arey Badri," Masterji stuffed a pan into his mouth. "Hanuman does not sing." "And what will you sing anyway?" asked Dharampal, carefully painting Badri's nose a bright red. "Hanuman Ravan ki dushmani amar rahe."